Serious, people who have witnessed a violent death. How was your experience? Viewers edition. Story 1. Anyway, the girl comes in while the husband with a tiny baby in back pulls up right outside the front door, not 3 feet from my face. First customer tells the girl, "You best get out of my face before I take your life." Girl goes outside, and before the slow door closes, the girl tells the driver he won't do it. Then the first guy sets beer on the counter, pulls out a big, shiny silver nickel-plated .45. He plants 6 shots in the driver's chest, and it seems like the guy across the counter never looks my way while I'm tapping the silent alarm trying to decide if I should use the little weak butt .22 automatic my employer provided because I worked alone. I was never afraid, but my mind said, hell nah. The driver just drove off with his whole chest blown up and one of his ears missing from a flame-splitting .45. What's a .22 going to do? And he has a clip in his gun, so he's got more bullets. Dude threw a 5 on the counter and said, keep the change. I'm still standing in the same spot as the shooter just walked out. Took a right and left walking. So cops pulled up with no lights and no hurry. Told them what I saw and said I had to pee. They literally were not going to let me. They were wrong. Told me I already answered all I know. It's recorded in VCR in the back room by my boss on the way, and they can go watch me pee, but it wasn't happening behind the counter. Took a couple of days off, but when an investigator showed up at my house and said I would have to testify in court since the shooter turned himself in, I told him I don't remember anything. Got a subpoena, refused to show. They came and got me. Locked me up too till court the next day. Went to court with all my paperwork, where I had 5 different mental facilities that I had spent time in for mental breakdown. I refused to say a word. They had VCR tapes showing it all, and I had to sit up there and watch me watching it all over again, looking straight at the shooter, staring straight at me. Judge gave me 3 days for contempt. Back to the same jail where he was, men on one side, women on the other side of the building. Shooter was charged with murder. Guy made it to her, but passed away right there in that long butt white Lincoln. Shooter sent word to my side by the trustee and said I did the right thing. My boss came to get me out of jail. It cost him, but not me. They gave the shooter 35 years for second-degree murder. He was out at 7. I still see that dude once in a while. He just nods his head, and I keep moving. Saw CCX a lot worse growing up, and I just have to keep it moving. I thank God I'm retired now, but I worked in that store for 12 years alone, always thought I had to feed my kids, and I refused to beg for welfare for a dime as long as I could. I think if I had not, I would have really lost my mind. Story 2. I am an alcoholic, 37 years sober. I drank with a purpose since my 18th birthday, drinking age in New York, 1973. I got a DUI in Florida in 1975. DUI school inadvertently taught us what the police look for in a drunk driver. I drove drunk most nights for the next 10 years without so much as a speeding ticket. Thank you, National Safety Council. I started out as a happy drunk. Come on, I'll buy you a beer type happy. 12 years later, not so happy. What I'm trying to say is, unless you know the drunk, do not try to aggressively take a drunk's keys. Call the police if you have to, but for God's sake, do not knowingly or unknowingly tangle with a drunk like me. When drunk, I have no sense of pain or the sense to stop pounding you once you stop fighting back. You will know who your real friends are by who is and isn't taking their lives into their own hands while pulling me off you. I have a flash temper that I have no problem controlling if I'm not drinking. When I got a snootful, it wouldn't take accidentally bumping into me to get your story on this thread, on the receiving end of my story. I was like a trapdoor spider. So long as you leave me alone, stay away from me, and the barmaid pays attention to my empty glass, all's right with the world. Screw with me in any way, even friendly, after 5 or 6 Boilermakers, and things will go wrong for you before you know it. You may not even know what hit you, literally, until you come out of your coma. I came real close to beating my own mother to unaliveness at 3 a.m. in the morning of September 20th, 1985. What did she do to tick me off so badly? She knocked on my fender, parked in her driveway, and asked if I was all right. If she had opened my door, I would have ended her life with my bare hands. That thought would never have entered my head had I not been drinking. I had to yell, "Get the frick away from the car." That was all that I could think of to say to save her life. The scary part was I didn't even lock my door, so it was a crapshoot whether she lived or didn't. September 24th, 1985. I made arrangements with my job and signed myself into a 28-day treatment program. It saved mine and possibly others' lives of people in bars who said hello wrong or bumped into me on the way to the can. I can say that I haven't been in a fight in 37 years, so something is working. There was an old 60s Western program starring Walter Brennan called The Sons of Will Sonnet. Brennan's tagline was, "No brag, just fact." The above story was true for me. No brag, just fact. Story 3. My time to shine. I've seen so many traffic accidents. Once we were stuck in a huge traffic jam in the summer sun in the Mediterranean, and back then there was no real air conditioning. I totally envied the biker who drove past us. A few hours later, I saw him again, unalive. The road had been blocked due to an accident, and when he started speeding past the cars, he caused another traffic jam and a huge mess. The street at my old home was almost made for car racing. It was, however, a residential street, thus with strict speed limits. That didn't stop some youngsters from doing it anyway in the night. One of them saw a pedestrian and tried to dodge him, but he lost control over his car and mowed down the pedestrian, and crashed into the parked cars. His friend was behind him and tried to dodge the wreck and lost control as well and ended up parking inside a camping van. One of them also had hit a parked bike, which had been catapulted through the air for maybe 20 meters. The entire street looked like the crash landing of a plane. As a kid, it really left a big impression on what terrific forces cars can exert. However, the one death that really left the biggest mark on me was the tamest of them all. I drove past a car that had crashed into a tree. The driver apparently ran off, but the co-pilot was left hanging inside, literally. She was dressed for disco, which hinted that she must have passed away in the early morning. But even after rush hour, and quite possibly 1,000 cars driving past, she was still inside the wreck, and apparently no one informed the authorities. To make it even worse, that beautiful and really safe-looking country road, straight, broad, with many fields rather than obstacles, had a dozen small shrines reminding others of people that passed away on this road due to car accidents. However, her spot never received any cross, flowers, candles, or anything else. Only those that saw remember. I've also twice seen a puddle of blood left behind after a stabbing, plus one guy really had to commit seppuku in the botanical garden during lunchtime. Only saw the park being locked down and police showing up. Why do people feel the need to inconvenience other people at their last moment? The same city had also 3 incidents of people jumping in front of the train during rush hour. I've not been there, but I wanted to note it as well. Story 4. I didn't die, but about 6 months ago, I went with my roommate to an amusement park around Halloween. We were drinking the entire night, but by the time we got to our car, we were both dead sober, and we also waited in line at McDonald's for an hour before driving back home. It was an hour drive, and I started falling asleep in the passenger side. I woke up to see the car literally flying off the road, and I screamed and immediately passed out. I woke up again upside down, screaming and crying. Then it was black again. The next time I came to, I was on the ground and had no idea what was going on. Couldn't hear or see, and then I turned my head and saw red and blue lights. All of a sudden, I could hear, and she was crying and telling me not to look at her. I still couldn't talk, and I thought she was impaled. Long story short, she broke her arm, but I broke my neck and my spine, my ribs, my foot, my collarbone, and bruised my lungs. I came home from the hospital a week after she did, and 2 days after I got home, all of my oxy disappeared. Turns out that night she was doing oxy, which is probably why she crashed the car, and then stole all of mine after she almost ended my life, and would not admit to it. She still believes her car broke down. She tried to get me to give her my muscle relaxers too, and I refused. I gave her the benefit of the doubt since she just got broken up with and doesn't have a car anymore. But she's acted just crazy with drinking 4+ bottles of wine a day. She moved out since then, but she came here to get some of her stuff, and she crashed her new boyfriend's truck into our neighbor's house, so she's obviously still doing drugs and didn't learn from almost ending my life. That was the last straw, blocking her on everything after that night. My life will never be the same after that night, and it's really hard for me to do anything with the amount of pain I'm still in, even though I'm better. Story 5. One night coming home from where I can't remember where, I got off the bus, and a couple blocks away, I saw a bunch of people standing around a car parked in the middle of the street, but at a distance away. Underneath, the rear end is some dude. I'm like looking at a bizarre land where no one is helping this guy. I go towards him, asking what happened, and call the emergency services, because again, there are many people standing around while some guy is stuck under a freaking car. I get about 6 or 7 feet, and at first I see a bunch of blood around his mouth. Then I started noticing other things, like the amount of blood around his midsection, his eyes closed, no sound of pain or freaking out, and also no rise and fall of his chest. He was gone, dead. Finding out on the news the next day, the guy was hit by a car 2 additional times and dragged a short distance, where he and the vehicle he was under stopped. All parties stayed on scene except for the car that hit him first. Also found out the next day the reason for the blood around his midsection, he was cut practically all the way through. A couple months later, through another news report, the guy whose life was ended was in town for work and had a wife and very young child back in California. He kinda jogged, attempting to cross the street to get his laundry out of one of the machines from the laundromat a couple blocks away. He was hit in the left shoulder by the initial car, only causing him to lose balance when the second car hit him. People who saw it said he was dragged 20 feet before escaping one car, but then getting lodged under the third car and being dragged another 30 feet. I came upon the incident roughly 10 or 15 minutes after. This really got to me for a while, and I'm still nervous walking or being outside after dark. This incident and turning 40 really had me thinking abnormally about death, and the poor guy and his family. They still haven't found the hit-and-run vehicle, and this occurred in fall of 2016. Story 6. I survived a mass shooting in Boone, North Carolina after my neighbor's son ended the lives of both of them, and then the first 3 responding officers with an assault rifle. Technically, I was considered a hostage, because my house was right next door and he kept taking pot shots out in the neighborhood. The cops couldn't create a perimeter close enough to evacuate us until after dark, which was 10 hours later. Once the sun had set, they ushered us to our own vehicles and took us to the staging area. I've never seen more police officers in my life. Even neighboring states sent units, probably over 5,000 cops. I got interviewed by multiple law enforcement officers and a couple of news crews. I eventually left to go stay with family in Charlotte, where I had recently moved. To be completely honest, I've shot a man once before, many years ago, in self-defense, but I've never heard people pass away until the event in Boone. In my personal case, my attacker thankfully survived his 3 .22 LR caliber gunshot wounds. One of the first 3 officers took about 2 hours to bleed out, and he called out a lot in that time. He spoke about his family, he spoke to God, he called for help, and towards the end, he called for his mother. That still haunts me to this day. Me and my ex-girlfriend, I was just visiting to get my things when this happened, had to keep our heads low, beneath window level, while we could hear a man slowly passing away. It was truly horrific and tragic, because no one could save him, and he knew it. You could hear it in his voice. Eventually, a few hours after I left, the gunman committed seppuku. I strongly suspect hearing one of his victims slowly passing away on his porch contributed to that decision. The crappiest part of it all was how my actual girlfriend at the time accused me, when I got back, of cheating on her and being gone too long. I didn't sleep that night, not until the situation was completely resolved. It was rough to say the least, and I'll never forget it. Story 7. I live in the UK, and in the 90s, I was still very young, about 7. My dad was driving me to my friend's birthday party. We were going down a dual carriageway next to a shopping complex. The car park was on a raised bit of land, then you had a small hill running down towards the road, then a crash barrier. What I saw next has haunted me for years, especially now I have my own child with special needs. A family was loading shopping into a car that was parked at the edge of the car park, overlooking the 70-mile-per-hour road they had a kid with. I think he was 10. He had autism, so he got out of a seat and decided to run to the cars on the road. He rolled down the hill, his dad running after him, fell and broke his ankle. The little boy went under the barrier and stepped right in front of a lorry doing about 60 miles per hour. This happened right in front of us. We were overtaking the lorry and just saw it slam on the brakes and what looked like a rag doll sliding across the road. My dad screamed and pulled over, told me not to look, and ran to the scene. I freaking looked. All my mind will let me remember is a streak of red on the road. and a lump laying on the ground with people crying and looking shocked. I think it was in the news at some point, and the driver of the lorry ended his life not long after. It was just an accident, no fault to anyone. The kid just managed to outrun his parents, and he was on the road so quickly the lorry driver never had a chance to stop. Story 8. Saw a 6-vehicle pileup one morning about a year ago on the highway on the way to work. I didn't see the wreck happen, but it must have been very recent, several minutes. A full-sized pickup into the cement barrier, driver okay. Behind that, an SUV on the shoulder with front and rear end damage, driver okay. A box truck a few car lengths behind that with front end damage, and a work van pretty deep into the back end. Box truck driver okay. The work van driver was clearly deceased. The dashboard was through the front driver's seat. The driver was crushed between the dashboard and the shelves, or whatever was behind the driver's seat in the back of the van. The 2 other vehicles behind the van had minor damage, being forced to come to a stop to avoid hitting the van. I've been telling my coworkers to drive safe, keep your distance from the car in front of you, and talk about that wreck on a regular basis. That man had probably woken up his kids in the process of getting ready for work that morning, made them a quick breakfast, kissed his wife, bid goodbye, and set off to face the day, and perhaps 30 minutes later met his death. His coworkers were wondering where he was. Perhaps he was rarely late or very reliable. I don't want to imagine getting a phone call that your husband, father, friend, brother had their life ended so suddenly. Y'all be careful out there. You never know when your last moment will be. Tell those you care about that you do. Spend as much time as you can with them. Story 9. When I was 3, I was in the car with my dad and my brother. I was sleeping in the back seat, so I was laying down. Thinking back, I believe God did that for a reason. I hear my brother and my dad low-key start to freak out by the train tracks while waiting for the train to pass. Out of nowhere, this lady puts her earphones in her ears and runs into the train. I hear my brother freaking out. He was 12. And I'm trying to get up, but he's forcing me down. He's screaming at me to stay down so he doesn't let me see. I was kind of mad because I wanted to see what was happening. But now that I'm older, I'm so glad he didn't let me see. He saw the lady's body parts land on people's windshields, and I just remember everyone screaming bloody murder. I have this memory in the back of my mind. I'm sure my brain did that on its own, but I'm 29, and to this day I'm terrified of train tracks. If I'm driving past them and I even see the lights turn on, I get a mini heart attack and floor it if possible, or brake if I have time, and my anxiety is crazy when I see the Metrolink pass. Growing up, Thomas the Choo-Choo Train always made me nauseous, and I never understood why. My therapist, yes, I'm messed up and been through a lot since then, told me it could definitely correlate. I didn't see it, but I heard it, and to hear that at 3 years old is entirely too extreme. Story 10. This is absolutely not true. Don't listen to this. I was a lifeguard for 9 years, and I still have connections to the profession. My mom is the manager of a pool and still puts me through the recertification classes so I can keep up on my license. The most important priority is always to handle the victim with care. This means making sure their heads are out of the water, and if it's a suspected spinal injury, in this case it absolutely was, you need to use your arms and hands, and even the victim's arms, as splints to keep the head stable, and never ever go anywhere near the spine. The lifeguard on duty should have had a backboard to bring over, which is applied to the victim while they're still in the water, and the person keeping the head stable doesn't move until it's securely tightened in place with a head splint. And with the backboard, everything is supported and protected properly, and only then do you focus on taking them out of the water. Other priorities before getting to dry land include making sure the victim is calm enough to comply with instructions and evacuate the area so nobody can crowd you or react in a way that obscures the work. So basically, make sure the person is in a safe and secure position and there are no obstacles you can control in the way before worrying about how to get them on dry land or in a boat. Stay safe in the water, guys. Nobody ever truly realizes how horrifying large bodies of water can be until something happens. Story 11. My mother was red-rummed in front of me at the age of 4, and it was swept under the rug and considered a seppuku because the guy was my stepfather and a cop. I think you can imagine how much that messed my entire life up, especially since my own family members tell me one thing, even though they weren't there, yet the nightmares tell an entirely different story. They say pistol. I remember a rifle clear as day. I'd question that my mind might be playing tricks, but I can recall a fair amount of details about my environment at the time, so that's difficult to do. I even tried talking to the ME that did her autopsy when I was older, but the secretary got awfully shifty when I brought it up and asked to talk to the doctor about it. They never got back to me, naturally. Then there's the issue of a 4-year-old saying, "He killed her, he killed her, he killed her," when my grandmother came to pick me up, because I was so young, there's no way I'd be truthful about something like that, right? The 80s was such a different time. It's been a long and arduous road, filled with PTSD because of it, but I'm still here because though he took my mom, he couldn't break my spirit. The oddest thing is I have a deep interest in firearms and firearm safety, and even joined the military when others would shun them. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.